Let's start with a simple truth. If Bruce Lee had never been born, martial arts in the West might still be a niche hobby practiced in dimly lit dojos tucked away in Chinatown basements. Hollywood action films might still look like slow-motion brawls with sloppy punches. And the idea of blending East and West philosophy, culture, and physical mastery might have taken decades longer to hit mainstream America. Bruce Lee didn't just change movies. He didn't just change fighting. He changed the way the world thought about human potential. And that is why today we re-diving into the top 10 facts about Bruce. These stories that go way beyond the poster on your wall or the clips you've seen on TikTok. These are the truths that made him not only a legend but also a revolutionary. Now let us kick it off with the first fact, one that almost prevented his entire career from ever happening. Fact number 1. Bruce Lee was almost drafted into the U.S. military and it could have erased his career before it started. It's 1963. Bruce is 23 years old, living in the United States, teaching martial arts out of small garages and rented studios. America is in the thick of the Cold War, and the Vietnam conflict is heating up. Young men across the country dread one thing more than anything else: the draft notice in the mailbox. For most of them, that slip of paper meant the end of their college dreams, the end of their freedom, and the beginning of jungle patrols halfway across the world. Bruce was no different. He received notice to take the standard U.S. Army physical exam. Imagine this. The man who would later inspire Sylvester Stallone and countless action heroes was standing in line, shirt off, waiting for a military doctor to measure him up for war. Had things gone differently, Bruce Lee might have become a nameless soldier trudging through the swamps of Southeast Asia. But here's where fate or maybe destiny stepped in. Bruce had notoriously poor eyesight. He was nearsighted to the point that he needed thick glasses or contact lenses, which were still relatively primitive in the early 60s. During the physical exam, the Army doctors quickly realized he was unfit for combat duty. They classified him as unqualified, essentially exempting him from the draft. That single medical evaluation may have changed the history of global pop culture. Think about it, how many Americans with sharp vision ended up drafted into Vietnam, their lives diverted forever? Now imagine if Bruce had gone. Would we have entered the Dragon? Would Kung Fu have exploded in the US the way it did in the 70s? Would Bruce have been another casualty, his talent lost in the chaos of war? For American audiences, this twist of fate feels eerily familiar. How many stories have you heard of famous athletes who only got their break because they dodged disaster? Maybe a football player who skipped a plane ride that later crashed, or a musician who survived an accident that took others? Bruce's near draft fits right into that narrative of their but for fortune. It reminds us that history isn't just about talent or hard work. Sometimes it's about timing, chance, and the tiniest details, like a bad pair of eyes. And ironically, his poor eyesight didn't hold him back in martial arts. If anything, it sharpened other senses. Bruce developed an almost preternatural awareness of motion, rhythm, and intent. Students recalled how he could anticipate an opponent's strike before it landed, not because he saw perfectly, but because he felt the rhythm of their body. It's the same way a blind pianist feels the keys without seeing them. That limitation became an edge. So, the first fact about Bruce Lee is also the first what-if of his legend. America almost swallowed him into its war machine. Instead, he was freed to wage a different kind of battle, against stereotypes, against limits, and against the idea that East and West had to stay separate. Fact number 2. Bruce Lee was so fast that cameras couldn't keep up with him. Now, let's shift gears from fate to sheer physics. When people say Bruce Lee was fast, they don't mean quick for a martial artist. They mean fast on a level that broke technology. In the early 60s and 70s, Hollywood cameras typically shot at 24 frames per second. That was more than enough to capture a bar fight in a Western or a brawl in a gangster movie. But when Bruce Lee moved, he outpaced those frames. Directors found that when Bruce threw a punch or a kick at full speed, the camera picked it up as a blur. Viewers literally couldn't see what he did. For fight scenes, that was a nightmare. Imagine buying a ticket to watch this new martial arts sensation only to see a confusing smear of motion on the screen. Had a solution, they had to tell Bruce to slow down. Think about that for a second. In sports broadcasting, we slow things down with instant replay, because athletes are too fast to appreciate in real time. Baseball fans know this. When a pitcher throws a 100 mph fastball, you need a high-speed camera to even follow the ball to the plate. NFL fans see the same with a wide receiver making a fingertip, catch a slow-mo, makes it clear. But Bruce Lee wasn't performing in a stadium with high-speed cameras. He was in front of film crews with 1960s technology. The only fix was to have him deliberately fight at half speed. In some cases, directors even cranked the film speed faster so that when played back, the slowed-down footage looked normal to the audience. That fact alone tells you something about his explosiveness. Let's put it in American terms. Picture a pro boxer like Muhammad Ali, famous for his lightning jabs. Now imagine Ali's punch being so quick that ABC Sports couldn't film it without special equipment. That was Bruce Lee in every fight sequence. His fists and feet weren't just tools, they were faster than the machines meant to record them. It wasn't only about the big moves. Students reported that Bruce's 1-inch punch, that legendary stow demonstration where he could knock a man backward from just an inch away, happened so quickly the brain barely registered the motion. It felt more like being struck by a sudden burst of air pressure than a fist. That kind of kinetic energy, delivered in fractions of a second, has rarely been replicated. Even in modern MMA gyms with athletes trained on sports science. To really grasp how unusual this was, compare it with film stars of the era. Western audiences were used to John Wayne's lumbering haymakers or Clint Eastwood's dramatic but slow pistol draws. Then, along came Bruce, who could land 3 strikes before the average cowboy finished one. To American viewers, it felt like alien speed, like watching a hummingbird flap its wings compared to a crow. There's also a psychological edge to that speed. In real combat sports, speed often matters more than raw strength. A smaller fighter who gets there first controls the exchange. Bruce embodied that truth. He didn't need to be 220 pounds with bulging muscles. His advantage was that by the time you saw his strike coming, it had already landed. In a way, he hacked the human nervous system. Most people take about 0.2 seconds to react to a visual cue. Bruce could launch, strike, and reset inside that window. Think of the implications if you're an American watching this. In the early 70s, the country is coming off the heavyweight boxing craze. Joe Frazier, George Foreman, the rise of Ali. The spectacle is about size, power, and grit. Then you see this wiry guy, barely 135 pounds, moving like a flash of lightning, making giants look clumsy. It's no wonder audiences were hooked. He proved something people didn't want to believe, that agility, timing, and precision could humble brute force. And maybe that's why Bruce's on-screen fights resonated so deeply. They weren't just stunts. They were demonstrations of a principle every American kid could dream about, that brains and speed could beat size. That you didn't have to be the biggest guy in the room to be the most dangerous. By the time you absorb these two facts, the near miss with the U.S. military draft, and the reality that Bruce Lee had to literally slow himself down for cameras, you'd start to see the outlines of a legend shaped by contradictions. On one hand, he was almost swallowed up by a war he didn't believe in. On the other, he was so far ahead of his time that technology couldn't keep pace. Fate tried to hold him back, but his body and spirit kept pushing past the limits of ordinary life. And that's just the beginning. Fact number 3. Bruce Lee created his own martial arts philosophy. Jeet Kune Do. If you only know Bruce Lee from the flying kicks and choreographed fight scenes, you might think of him as just another action star who happened to be exceptionally fast. But Bruce wasn't just fighting with his body, he was also fighting with his mind. He was, in many ways, a philosopher. And out of that philosophy, he created something revolutionary, Jeet Kune Do, or the way of the intercepting fist. Now that name alone sounds poetic, almost like something out of a Zen riddle. And in a sense, it is. But behind the poetry was a radical idea that shook martial arts to its core. Up until the mid-20th century, martial arts, whether karate, judo, or kung fu, were often locked inside rigid systems. If you studied karate, you stuck to karate. If you studied Wing Chun, you drilled those forms until they were second nature. Each style was its own closed box. Bruce looked at those boxes and said, "Why limit yourself?" Jeet Kune Do wasn't about memorizing 1,000 forms. It was about stripping away what was useless and keeping only what worked. He often said, "Absorb what is useful, discard what is not, add what is uniquely your own." That mantra became the DNA of Jeet Kune Do. It was martial arts as a living, breathing thing, not a fossil trapped in tradition. To Americans, especially in the 1960s, this felt familiar. Think of it like jazz. Jazz musicians didn't just play notes on a sheet. They improvised, adapted, responded in real time. It's exactly what Bruce was doing with fighting. If karate had a rigid kata like a written score, Bruce was saying, throw away the sheet music. Improvise. The genius of this philosophy was that it matched the realities of real combat. On the streets of Oakland, where Bruce once taught, no mugger was going to attack you with a clean, traditional karate stance. Fights were messy, unpredictable, chaotic. Kune Do prepared you for that. It was about intercepting an opponent's move the moment it began, cutting through the chaos with directness and simplicity. In fact, Bruce was decades ahead of his time. Modern MMA mixed martial arts owes a debt to Jeet Kune Do. Today's fighters cross-train in boxing, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, Muay Thai, they blend styles. That idea that the fighter matters more than the style was Bruce's gift. Long before Dana White and the UFC, Bruce Lee was showing Americans what real combat looked like when you broke down the barriers between arts. But here's the thing. Jeet Kune Do wasn't just about fighting. It was about living. Bruce would often compare martial arts to water. Water has no form of its own, yet it can fill any container. It can crash like a wave or drip like a stream. To him, life was the same. If you clung to rigid ways of thinking, you became brittle and breakable. But if you were like water, adaptable, flowing, you could survive and even dominate. That's why Jeet Kune Do has been embraced not just by fighters but by entrepreneurs, artists, even military leaders. It's a metaphor for flexibility. Think about Steve Jobs, who borrowed ideas from calligraphy to shape Apple's design philosophy. That's Jeet Kune Do thinking in a business suit. Or think of a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, improvising plays on the field when the defense collapses the pocket. That's Jeet Kune Do on the gridiron. For Bruce, fighting was never just physical. It was about breaking barriers, racial, cultural, mental. Kune Do wasn't Chinese or Japanese or Western. It was universal. It belonged to anyone willing to test themselves honestly. And that's why this fact about Bruce is so important. He wasn't just a movie star. He was a thinker who challenged the world to stop worshiping tradition and start seeking truth. Fact number 4. Bruce Lee was a champion cha-cha dancer. Now, if the last fact blew your mind, this one might make you laugh. Bruce Lee, the man we think of as the ultimate symbol of toughness, once strutted across the dance floor in glittering competitions. And not only that, he won. Yes, Bruce Lee was a cha-cha champion. Let's rewind. Bruce grew up in Hong Kong in the 1940s and 50s. A city buzzing with British colonial culture, Chinese traditions, and a heavy dose of imported American trends. Rock and roll was creeping in, and dance halls were everywhere. Bruce was a teenager, fiery, restless, and already notorious for getting into street fights. But he also loved rhythm. He loved movement. And so, almost as a joke at first, he picked up cha-cha dancing. But here's the thing about Bruce. He never did anything halfway. Once he got interested, he practiced relentlessly. He carried a small notebook with over 100 different cha-cha steps, written down so he could memorize them and drill them. Friends said he'd practice late into the night, repeating spins and footwork until it was second nature. By 1958, at just 18 years old, he entered and won the Hong Kong Cha-Cha Championship. Now why does this matter? Why should we care that a martial arts icon also shook his hips to Latin beats? Because it tells us something about Bruce Lee's mind. For him, movement was universal. Whether it was a punch, a kick, or a dance step, it was all about rhythm, timing, and flow. Dancing trained his body to move with precision, coordination, and style. And all of that later fed directly into his martial arts. Think about it. Footwork is the foundation of fighting. Boxers know this. You can't land a punch if your feet are clumsy. Bruce's cha-cha training gave him unmatched balance and agility. He could glide across a dojo floor the way he glided across a dance floor. In fact, many of his students in America noticed how light he was on his feet compared to traditional martial artists. He didn't stomp, he floated. That was the cha-cha talking. It also made him relatable. For young Americans in the 1960s, dance was part of identity. The twist, the jitterbug, later disco of it, shaped social life. To know that Bruce Lee had a dancer's rhythm humanizes him. He wasn't just a deadly fighter. He was also the guy who could probably outshine you at a wedding reception. And here's another American comparison. Muhammad Ali again. Ali's boxing footwork was often compared to dancing, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, while Bruce literally danced. His fighting had that same bounce, that same unpredictable rhythm that kept opponents guessing. In an era when most martial artists drilled rigid forms, Bruce was mixing in the flow of Latin dance. That's why his fights look so different, so alive on screen. There's also a bigger cultural message here. Bruce grew up between world's Chinese tradition at home, British schooling, American pop culture flooding in. The cha-cha was part of that melting pot. Just like his martial arts philosophy, his dancing was about blending influences. He didn't see East and West as opposites. He saw them as ingredients to mix into something new. Maybe that's why audiences connected with him so deeply. Because in America especially, that blending of cultures is the national story. Immigrants arrive, bring their traditions, and then those traditions remix into jazz, rock, hip-hop, basketball, cuisine, you name it. Bruce was living proof of that process. A Chinese kid winning a Latin dance contest in a British colony, then growing up to teach martial arts in America. That's not just a resume. That's the story of the modern world. So yes, Bruce Lee was a cha champion. But more than that, he was proof that rhythm is universal, that artistry shows up in unexpected places, and that sometimes the deadliest fighter in the room is also the best dancer. Fact number 5. Bruce Lee was only 5'7" and 135 pounds, but his strength was legendary. When most people picture a fighter, they imagine a heavyweight, big, broad-shouldered, towering over opponents. In American sports culture, size often equals power. Think of the NFL linemen, or heavyweight boxers like George Foreman. They're huge, intimidating presences. And then you look at Bruce Lee. 5 feet 7 inches, 135 pounds. By Hollywood standards, that was small. By fight standards, it was almost tiny. Yet his strength and power became the stuff of legend. So how did a man who barely weighed as much as an average American teenager generate such dominance? The answer lay in his training, his discipline, and his obsession with pushing the human body beyond ordinary limits. Bruce wasn't about building big muscles for show. He believed in functional strength, explosiveness, precision, endurance. His workouts often included exercises that even modern athletes find brutal. He performed single-arm pull-ups like they were nothing. He could hold a dragon flag, an exercise popularized by Sylvester Stallone in Rocky IV, long before anyone else made it famous. He trained with isometrics, lifting weights, bodyweight movements, and unique drills he designed himself. One of his most famous feats was the 1-inch punch. Standing almost chest to chest with his opponent, he would place his fist an inch away and, with a lightning-fast thrust of hips, shoulders, and explosive power, send the person flying backward. American audiences who saw demonstrations of this were stunned. Here was a man lighter than most football kickers, launching grown men off their feet with a move that looked like magic. But beyond parlor tricks, Bruce's strength translated into raw fighting ability. Friends and training partners recalled his kicking power as bone-rattling. One story tells of him kicking a heavy bag so hard it broke the metal chain holding it. Another describes him knocking a sparring partner clear across the room with a sidekick. These weren't exaggerated tales. They were witnessed by credible fighters who went on record saying Bruce's striking power was unlike anything they'd ever felt. The contrast to American culture at the time was striking. The 1960s and 70s were dominated by heavyweight champions in boxing. Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, George Foreman, big men who used their size to intimidate. But Bruce Lee flipped that script, showed that someone of average stature could be stronger, faster, more dangerous than men twice their size if they trained intelligently. It's a lesson that still resonates today. In gyms across America, people focus on aesthetics, six-pack abs, bulging biceps. Bruce's philosophy was different. He built a body that worked, not just one that looked good. That's why so many modern strength coaches still study his routines. He was ahead of his time, using resistance bands, full body movements, and explosive plyometrics, decades before they became mainstream. Perhaps the best way to understand this fact is to think about athletes like Allen Iverson in basketball or Barry Sanders in footballs, Mauler men in sports dominated by giants, yet impossible to contain because of their speed, agility, and strength-to-weight ratio. Bruce was the martial arts equivalent of that, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous fighter in the room, isn't the biggest one. It's the one who knows how to use every ounce of their body like a weapon. Fact number 6. Hollywood rejected Bruce Lee, so he went back to Hong Kong and became a superstar. Today we look at Bruce Lee as one of the most bankable stars of all time, the face that launched a global martial arts craze. But back in the late 1960s, Hollywood didn't see him that way. To them, he was a risk. Too foreign, too short, too unconventional. And worst of all, he didn't fit their stereotype of what an Asian man should look like on screen. Bruce started to break through in American television. He played Kato in The Green Hornet from 1966 to 1967. The show itself only lasted one season, but Bruce stole every scene he was in. Audiences loved him. Kids across America tuned in just to see Kato's lightning-fast moves. But studio executives, they didn't know what to do with him. They saw him as a sidekick, not a star. There's an infamous story about Bruce pitching a TV show called The Warrior. It was about a Chinese martial artist wandering the American West, blending action with philosophy. Sound familiar? It should, because a few years later, Warner Brothers released Kung Fu starring David Carradine, a white actor in the lead role. Hollywood had stolen Bruce's idea, but refused to cast him as the lead because, in their words, an Asian man couldn't carry a show for American audiences. That rejection cut deep. Bruce had proven himself as a teacher, training celebrities like Steve McQueen, James Coburn, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He had charisma, skill, vision, but Hollywood's prejudice blocked his path. So Bruce made a bold choice, went back to Hong Kong, where he'd grown up, to make movies on his own terms. And what happened next was a cultural explosion. His first two films, The Big Boss 1971 and Fist of Fury 1972, smashed box office records across Asia. Crowds lined up around the block. People fainted from excitement at premieres. Bruce Lee wasn't just a star, he was a phenomenon. His films portrayed him as the righteous underdog, standing up to corrupt bosses, oppressive invaders, and injustice. Audiences connected with that energy. They saw themselves in his fight against systems stacked against him. Hollywood couldn't ignore him anymore. By 1973, Warner Brothers came calling with a co-production. Enter the Dragon. This was Bruce's breakthrough into the global stage. Tragically, he died just weeks before the film's release, but by then he had already transformed cinema. The irony of this fact is sharp. The very industry that rejected him was forced to embrace him because he proved himself abroad. It's a story that resonates deeply in American culture. Think of African-American musicians in the 1950s who had to go to Europe to find recognition, only to return home celebrated. Or think of comedians who start on underground circuits before Hollywood discovers them. Bruce was part of that tradition, an outsider who proved his worth until the establishment had no choice but to acknowledge him. His journey also carried a deeper message about representation. Asian characters in Hollywood were often caricatures, villains, servants, or comic relief. Bruce broke that mold. He wasn't just another exotic sidekick. He was the hero. He carried the story. He demanded respect. That shift opened doors for future generations of Asian actors. From Jackie Chan to Jet Li to Simu Liu. So fact number 6 isn't just about Bruce Lee's career. It's about how he forced an industry to confront its own prejudice, how he carved his own path when the mainstream shut him out, and how he showed that sometimes rejection is the spark that lights the fire of greatness. Fact number 7. Bruce Lee was one of the first to bring Asian martial arts to American screens. When Bruce Lee exploded onto the Hollywood stage, most American audiences had never seen real martial arts before. Sure, there had been fight scenes in cowboy movies and war films, but they were sloppy brawls, wild haymakers. Slow wrestling matches, maybe a stage knife fight. What Bruce introduced was something completely alien to mainstream America. Clean, precise, devastating martial arts executed with speed and style. To put this in perspective, think about what American entertainment looked like in the early 1960s. The most popular TV shows were Westerns, Bonanza, Gunsmoke, and Rawhide. In those shows, fights were usually just two men throwing predictable punches, until one of them fell over. Then along came Bruce Lee in the Green Hornet, and suddenly viewers saw spinning kicks, lightning-fast punches, and graceful takedowns. It was unlike anything they had ever witnessed. For American kids, it was like discovering superheroes were real. You didn't need superpowers if you had martial arts. Bruce became the entry point for millions of Americans into Asian combat traditions. He was, in a sense, the first global martial arts ambassador. And he didn't just showcase the physical side, he carried the philosophy too. In his roles, Bruce embodied discipline, honor, and self-control. He made martial arts more than just fighting it was a way of life. This resonated especially in a time when America was dealing with counterculture movements, a rejection of authority, and a search for deeper meaning. Martial arts seemed to offer a spiritual alternative to chaos, and Bruce Lee became its face. Think about how this rippled through pop culture. After Bruce, suddenly karate dojos began opening all across the United States. Kids begged their parents to sign them up. Martial arts became part of suburban life, right alongside Little League and piano lessons. Hollywood followed suit by the 1980s. You had the Karate Kid, ninja movies, and martial arts cartoons, all thanks to the seed planted by Bruce Lee. Even professional sports felt his influence. Chuck Norris, who sparred with Bruce on screen in Way of the Dragon, built his own legacy partly because of the credibility Bruce brought to martial arts in America. Later, stars like Jackie Chan and Jet Li found open doors because Bruce had kicked them down first. And today, the UFC is the largest combat sports promotion in the world, regularly acknowledges Bruce Lee as a grandfather of mixed martial arts. It's hard to overstate how transformative this was. Before Bruce, most Americans saw Asians on screen as villains or background characters. After Bruce, they saw martial artists as heroes. He shifted an entire cultural lens. He wasn't just bringing martial arts to Hollywood, he was rewriting Hollywood itself. Fact number 8. Bruce Lee trained like no one else's workouts were brutal, scientific, and decades ahead of their time. If Bruce Lee's speed and power looked superhuman, that's because his training was far from normal. He was into just working out like other martial artists of his time. He was pioneering a system of fitness that blended Eastern philosophy with Western science. Long before the fitness industry caught up, Bruce believed the human body was a machine that could always be improved. While other martial artists stuck to traditional drills, Bruce was experimenting with resistance training, cardio, diet, and recovery in ways that felt futuristic. He was obsessed with efficiency, how to make the body faster, stronger, and more explosive without wasting energy. His workouts included roadwork long runs for stamina, combined with sprints for explosiveness. He lifted weights, focusing on compound movements like squats and deadlifts, which most martial artists avoided at the time because they thought weightlifting would make them muscle-bound. Bruce proved them wrong. His strength-to-weight ratio was off the charts. He also incorporated isometric static holds that built core power. One of his favorite moves was the dragon flag, an exercise so challenging that even modern athletes struggle with it. He performed one-arm push-ups and fingertip push-ups with ease. And when he wasn't training strength, he was working on flexibility, stretching for hours to ensure his kicks were both powerful and fluid. Bruce's diet was equally disciplined. He avoided baked goods and refined flour, which he called empty calories. He favored lean meats, vegetables, rice, and protein shakes. He even experimented with supplements, blending his own concoctions of vitamins and nutrients to fuel recovery. In many ways, he was a prototype of today's professional athlete, who relies on nutritionists and sports scientists to optimize performance. What's even more remarkable is how he documented everything. Bruce kept meticulous notes on his routines, his meals, and his progress. 8. These journals, published after his death, revealed a man who treated his body like a laboratory. He tested, analyzed, adjusted, and refined constantly. While most martial artists train through repetition, Bruce trained through experimentation. To Americans, this approach felt familiar, even revolutionary. It was the same mindset that fueled innovation in other fields. Whether Silicon Valley engineers building computers in their garages, or athletes like Jerry Rice, redefining football conditioning in the 1980s, Bruce wasn't just practicing martial arts. He was inventing a science of human performance. And let's not forget the psychological side. Bruce saw training as a form of discipline that shaped the mind as much as the body. His workouts weren't just about strength, they were about focus, resilience, and mental clarity. In that sense, he bridged East and West again. Meditation mixed with sweat, philosophy fused with dumbbells. For American fans, especially athletes, this was electrifying. They saw in Bruce not just a movie star, but a model of how far the human body could go. If you combined relentless work with relentless curiosity, that's why even today, fitness influencers, MMA fighters, and strength coaches still post Bruce Lee's routines, still cite him as an inspiration. Fact number 9. The mysterious death of Bruce Lee in 1973 still sparks debate today. July 20th, 1973. Bruce Lee was only 32 years old, at the peak of his career. With Enter the Dragon set to catapult him into global superstardom, and then suddenly he was gone. Official reports said he died from cerebral edemas, welling of the brain, possibly triggered by an allergic reaction to a painkiller. But almost immediately, rumors and conspiracy theories began swirling. How could a man so healthy, so disciplined, drop dead overnight? For many Americans, the shock was like losing a superhero. Imagine if Michael Jordan had died in 1991, just as he was about to win his first championship, or if Elvis had died in 1956, right as he was breaking into fame. That was the scale of loss. Bruce wasn't just a star, he was a symbol. And the suddenness of his death made it feel unreal, almost unacceptable. Some blamed the triads, the Chinese criminal underworld, suggesting Bruce was murdered for refusing to cooperate with them. Others whispered about a family curse, especially after his son Brandon Lee also died tragically on a movie set in 1993. Still others suspected Hollywood foul play, jealous rivals, or even supernatural forces. At the lack of clear answers only fueled the myths. The truth is likely simpler, but no less tragic. Bruce had been working himself to exhaustion, juggling film shoots, teaching, and endless training. He had collapsed earlier that year with seizures and headaches, warning signs of the condition that ultimately killed him. Doctors recommended rest. Bruce ignored them. He lived by pushing limits, and in the end, his body broke under the strain. But here's why this fact matters. The mystery of his death made Bruce Lee eternal. In America, we often elevate those who die. Young James Dean, Marilyn Monroe, Tupac, Kurt Cobain. Their early deaths freeze them in time, forever young, forever iconic. Bruce joined that pantheon. Had he lived to old age, he might have become just another retired actor. Instead, he remained a myth, a flame that burned too bright to last. To this day, debates continue. Books, documentaries, and podcasts revisit the case, re-examining medical reports, interviewing witnesses. Fans trade theories online. But maybe the point isn't how he died. Maybe the point is that he lived so intensely that 32 years was enough to change the world. Fact number 10. Bruce Lee's legacy shaped martial arts, cinema, and culture across the globe. More than 50 years after his death, Bruce Lee is still everywhere. His face appears on murals, t-shirts, and posters from Los Angeles to Hong Kong. His quotes, "Be water, my friend," get shared on social media like modern proverbs. His films are studied not just for entertainment, but as milestones in cinema history. And his martial arts philosophy continues to influence fighters, athletes, and thinkers worldwide. Let's break down that legacy. First, martial arts. Without Bruce, the explosion of dojos across America might never have happened. He made martial arts mainstream, inspired kids to trade toy guns for karate gi-eyes, to see discipline and training as paths to strength. And his creation, Jeet Kune Do, planted the seed for modern mixed martial arts. UFC President Dana White once called Bruce Lee the father of MMA. That says it all. Second, cinema. Bruce changed the way action movies were filmed. For him, fight scenes were clumsy filler between plot points. After him, they became the highlight. Directors from Quentin Tarantino to the Wachowskis, The Matrix cite Bruce as inspiration. Jackie Chan and Jet Li built careers in the house Bruce built. Even Marvel superheroes owe something to him: fast, fluid, graceful combat that feels both real and larger than life. Third, culture. Bruce Lee wasn't just an actor, he was a bridge. He showed that an Asian man could be the hero, the leading man, the icon. He shattered stereotypes that had held for decades. For Asian Americans growing up in the 70s and 80s, seeing Bruce on screen was life-changing. He proved that representation mattered, and his influence went beyond race. He became a symbol of individuality, of rebellion against limits. In America, that spirit resonated with young people, looking for authenticity in a world of conformity. Bruce's message that you don't have to follow rigid systems, that you can create your own path, fit perfectly into the American ethos of self-determination. Even today, athletes quote him, artists sample him, entrepreneurs adopt his philosophy. Be like water has become advice for startups adapting to markets. For basketball players adjusting mid-game, for anyone navigating a fast-changing world, Bruce Lee isn't just remembered. He's used actively, practically, across disciplines. That's legacy. So when you put all 10 facts together, what do you see? A man who was almost drafted into war, but was saved by poor eyesight. A man so fast that cameras couldn't capture him. A philosopher who created his own martial arts system. A dancer who found rhythm in combat. A small man with giant strength. An actor rejected by Hollywood who became an international superstar. A pioneer who brought martial arts to America. A fitness innovator decades ahead of his time. A legend whose death remains mysterious. And a legacy that still shapes the world today. Bruce Lee wasn't just a fighter, or an actor, or a philosopher. He was all of those things at once, and more. He was proof that limits are illusions, that discipline can unlock greatness, and that one person, in just 32 years, can change the direction of global culture. If you like this video, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with your friends who love history, movies, or martial arts. And of course, make sure you subscribe so you never miss our next deep dive into the legends and mysteries that shaped our world. Until next time, stay inspired, stay curious, and remember, be water, my friend.